I was being brought to set in a wheelchair. Like, I couldn't walk that far. So I had to tell everybody because I needed help. You know, I needed someone to help me stand, and I needed someone to help. I needed someone to help me to get there.
For 11 seasons, Christina Applegate and Ed O'Neill played daughter and father on Married, with Children, one of the most irreverent sitcoms in television history. What's remarkable is that decades after the cameras stopped rolling, the two have continued to talk about each other publicly, not through tabloid speculation, but in their own voices, on record, in interviews, and on Applegate's own podcast. This is that story, built from what they've actually said. Christina Applegate was 15 years old when she was offered the role of Kelly Bundy in 1987, and by her own account, she almost turned it down. She has said in interviews that when she first read the pilot script, her reaction was that it leaned too heavily on crude, bathroom-style humor for her taste. It wasn't until she watched the actual pilot episode, which notably didn't yet feature her or David Faustino in the roles they'd eventually make famous, that she and her mother found themselves laughing at how genuinely funny Ed O'Neill and Katie Sagal were together on screen. Seeing that chemistry changed her mind, and she said that by the time she went in to read for the part, it felt almost like a formality. Married, with Children was built to shock. It mocked the wholesome family sitcom formula that had dominated network television for decades, and it did so through crude jokes, sexual innuendo, and a family that insulted each other relentlessly. Kelly Bundy, the character Applegate played, was written as a ditzy, promiscuous teenage bombshell, a role that put a real teenage girl in a strange position, performing sexualized material for a national audience while she was still a minor. Ed O'Neill, who played her on-screen father Al Bundy, was already in his early 40s when the show began and had years of life and industry experience behind him. Over time, the working relationship between the two actors grew into something that both have since described, in their own words, as closer to a real father-daughter bond than a typical professional friendship between co-stars. Applegate has said that she went into the show emotionally guarded, describing herself as having her armor up during much of the early filming, and that O'Neill was one of the people who saw past that. The clearest picture of their relationship doesn't come from rumor or secondhand stories. It comes directly from Applegate herself. In August 2024, on her podcast Messy, which she co-hosts with actress Jamie Lynn Sigler, Applegate welcomed O'Neill as a guest, and the two spent the episode reflecting on their decades-long connection. Applegate told him plainly that she struggles to put their relationship into words, and said that he essentially raised her, joking that whatever people do or don't like about her personality, he can take the credit or the blame. She went further than a simple compliment about his talent. Applegate has said that O'Neill was present for some of the hardest moments of her life during the years they worked together, including her own mother's cancer diagnosis and treatment, which happened while Applegate was still a teenager on set. She's described him as someone who went through everything with her during that period, rather than someone who simply showed up to work and delivered his lines. She's also credited him directly with shaping her as a performer. Applegate has said she believes no one else could have played Al Bundy the way O'Neill did, attributing his comedic instincts and grounded, rough-around-the-edges energy to his working-class upbringing in Youngstown, Ohio. In her telling, watching him work, his timing, his willingness to commit fully to a bit, his ability to find humor in unlikely places, became something she absorbed and carried into her own approach to comedy. What she has been unambiguous about is how much she values their friendship today. On the podcast, she told him directly that he is family to her, not in a figurative, made-for-television sense, but as a statement of fact about her adult life. She described being able to talk to him on the phone for hours, saying he's the person she talks to more than almost anyone else, a notable admission from someone who has said she generally dislikes being on the phone at all. That's not the kind of thing people say about a coworker they haven't spoken to in years. It's the language people use about family. Applegate has also been candid, later in her life, about the fact that her years on Married, with Children, weren't uncomplicated. She has disclosed publicly that she was dealing with anorexia during the show's run, beginning around the same age she was cast, 15. She's described the experience of living with the eating disorder at the time as agonizing, and has said that people around the production noticed how little she was eating and raised it with her directly, even though, in her own mind at the time, she didn't perceive her body the way they did. This is a difficult part of her history that Applegate has chosen to share on her own terms, as an adult looking back, rather than something that was reported on while it was happening. It's a reminder that the pressures on a teenage actress carrying a role as sexualized as Kelly Bundy went well beyond what audiences at home could see. It also adds context to why she and O'Neill and the wider cast have described their bond in terms that go beyond typical professional courtesy. They were, in some very real ways, watching out for a kid who was navigating an unusually difficult set of pressures in public. It's true that Married, with Children faced a real and serious threat to its survival in 1989, when a Michigan woman named Terry Ricalta organized a boycott campaign after watching an episode she found offensive. Ricalta wrote to advertisers and appeared on television to make her case, and several major companies did pull their sponsorship from the show in response. For a period, the show's future was genuinely uncertain. What actually happened next has been well documented in entertainment coverage over the years. Rather than killing the show, the controversy generated an enormous amount of free publicity. Curious viewers who'd never watched before tuned in to see what the fuss was about, and the show's ratings climbed. The Fox network, still a young broadcaster at the time looking to establish its identity, leaned into the attention rather than away from it. Married, with Children not only survived the boycott, it became more central to Fox's identity than it had been before, eventually running to 259 episodes across 11 seasons, making it one of the longest-running live-action sitcoms in American television history. For Applegate, who was a teenager navigating this controversy in real time, that period would have been genuinely stressful. Her career and her sense of stability were both tied up in a show that was suddenly the subject of a national controversy. While the specific private conversations she had with O'Neill during that time haven't been laid out in detail publicly, it fits with everything both of them have said since about that era. That the adult cast members understood the pressure a teenage cast member was under, and that the group leaned on one another to get through it. Applegate has made clear on her podcast that her closeness with O'Neill wasn't an isolated relationship. It existed inside a wider network of connections with her former castmates that has held up for decades. She said that not much time passes without someone from the Married, with Children family checking in on someone else. She described Katie Segal, who played her on-screen mother Peggy Bundy, as someone who has come and laid in bed with her during hard periods, a small but telling detail about the kind of relationship that exists between them. She's also mentioned that she sees David Faustino, who played her on-screen brother Bud, regularly, and that their children ended up attending the same school for a period, keeping the two families connected well beyond the show itself. Applegate has framed this directly. Growing up, in her words, from a 15-year-old to a 24-year-old alongside these specific people gave those relationships a weight that an ordinary workplace friendship doesn't carry. When you spend the years that shape your adult identity working every day alongside the same small group of people, she suggested, the bond that forms isn't really comparable to a normal professional connection. It becomes something closer to how family is built. Married, with Children concluded in 1997 after 11 seasons, and it did not go out with the kind of send-off many long-running sitcoms get. There was no special farewell event marking its finale. The show that had been part of Fox's foundation for over a decade simply wrapped its final season and ended, a fact that has been noted by entertainment retrospectives in the years since. For a cast that had spent 11 years working together, years that, for Applegate, spanned her transition from a 15-year-old newcomer to a woman in her mid-20s. The lack of formal closure left something unresolved. But the relationships didn't end when the show did. Applegate and O'Neill's continued closeness, documented in interviews and their podcast conversation together, shows a friendship that outlasted the production itself by decades. Both actors went on to significant post-Married success. Applegate built a film and television career that included roles in the Anchorman franchise, Samantha Who, and, most notably, the Netflix dark comedy Dead to Me, which earned her critical acclaim and multiple award nominations. O'Neill found a second major hit as Jay Pritchett on Modern Family, a role that brought him a new generation of fans, multiple Emmy nominations, and renewed industry recognition well into his 70s. In August 2021, Applegate announced publicly that she had been diagnosed with multiple sclerosis, a chronic disease of the central nervous system that has no cure and can affect mobility, balance, and cognitive function. She revealed that doctors had found it while she was filming the final season of Dead to Me. She has been open in interviews since then about the physical toll. She now walks with a cane and has spoken about significant changes to her body and mobility, as well as the emotional weight of adjusting to a life she hadn't planned for. Applegate has not been shy about naming what the disease has cost her, both physically and emotionally, and she has repeatedly used humor as a way of processing what she's going through publicly rather than retreating from view. She's also spoken about how the diagnosis reshaped her sense of her own future as an actress, saying ahead of the 2023 SAG Awards that she could no longer imagine the physical demands of a long shooting day, and that the ceremony might be her last as a working actor. In November 2022, Applegate made one of her first major public appearances since her diagnosis became known, when she received a star on the Hollywood Walk of Fame. She used a cane during the ceremony and later showed up to the 2023 SAG Awards red carpet with her cane customized with the message Fou MS, accompanied by her daughter, Sadie Grace, who wore a coordinated outfit for the occasion. Then, in January 2024, at the rescheduled 75th Primetime Emmy Awards, Applegate walked out on stage, with the help of host Anthony Anderson and her cane, as the theme song from Married, with Children played. The audience rose to its feet in a spontaneous standing ovation as she made her way to the podium, visibly moved by the reception. True to her reputation for using comedy to defuse emotionally heavy moments, she thanked the crowd and then, through tears, joked that they were shaming her disability by standing, adding a quip about her body not being the product of the weight loss drug Ozempic, a line that got the room laughing through what had been, seconds earlier, a wave of raw emotion. She went on to present the award for Outstanding Supporting Actress in a Comedy Series, which went to Ayo Edebiri for The Bear. She had said before that appearance that she wasn't sure she'd attend another awards W as a working actor, given how physically demanding filming and travel had become for her. Showing up at all, in front of a room full of her industry peers, was itself an act of defiance against a disease that has taken so much control away from her. The Messy podcast, which Applegate launched with fellow MS patient Jamie Lynn Sigler, has become a space where she processes not just her illness but the broader arc of her life. In April 2025, Applegate spoke on the show about the death of her father, Robert Applegate, who had died 2 weeks earlier at the age of 90. She told a guest on the podcast that it was the first time she had truly allowed herself to cry about the loss, explaining that she had known his death was coming and had already said her goodbyes, which she suspected had let her put off actually feeling the full weight of it. That kind of raw, unscripted honesty has become a hallmark of how Applegate talks about her life now. Whether the subject is her illness, her family, or the people from her past who have stayed present in her life. It's the same honesty that runs through how she talks about O'Neill, not as a nostalgic footnote from a show she worked on 30 years ago, but as someone who is still, in a very literal sense, part of her support system today. Questions about a Married, with Children reunion have circulated among fans for years, especially as nostalgia for 80s and 90s sitcoms has grown. Since Applegate's diagnosis, those conversations have taken on a different shape, not centered on whether a reunion is logistically possible in the traditional sense, but on whether any version of the Bundys getting back together would need to accommodate what Applegate can and cannot physically do now. What's clear from the public record is that Applegate has found a format that works for her. Her podcast lets her have long, in-depth conversations, including the one with O'Neill himself, without the physical demands of a soundstage or the memorization required for scripted work. It's a format built around her current reality rather than around her old career, and it's given fans something closer to an actual reunion than any hypothetical sitcom revival likely could. It's worth remembering that O'Neill arrived on Married, with Children as a working actor who had already spent years grinding through smaller roles and stage work before landing Al Bundy, the role that would define the first act of his career. He was, by the time filming began, someone who understood the industry's harder edges, the unpredictability of the business, how quickly a show's fortunes could turn, and how easy it was for young performers to get lost inside a machine that didn't always prioritize their well-being. That perspective is part of why his relationship with a 15-year-old co-star reads as more than a passing kindness. He had the vantage point to recognize what she was up against, even when the industry itself wasn't necessarily built to protect her. O'Neill's career didn't stop expanding after Married, With Children ended, he moved into film roles throughout the 2000s and then found an entirely new level of visibility as Jay Pritchett on Modern Family, a performance that introduced him to a younger generation of viewers who had no memory of Al Bundy at all. He picked up multiple Emmy nominations for the role and became, by most measures, an even bigger name in his 60s and 70s than he had been at the height of Married, with Children. Yet in interviews and on Applegate's podcast, when the subject turns to the show that started it all, it's notable how much of his attention still goes to talking about the young actress he worked alongside for 11 years, rather than to his own accomplishments. That instinct, to keep circling back to Applegate rather than centering himself, runs through nearly every public account of their relationship. It's echoed in the fact that when the two finally sat down together for an extended, unscripted conversation on Messy in 2024, it was Applegate who set the tone, but it was clear from both of their comments that the affection ran in both directions, and that neither of them treated the years since Married, with Children ended as a gap in the relationship so much as a different chapter of the